This is a video on the menstrual cycle. And before we deal with the menstrual cycle, I think it's much easier to work out what's going on by working out exactly why it happens. And in order to work out why it happens, we just need to very briefly meet the female reproductive apparatus. And the labelling that you need to know are the ovaries, of which there's one here, and there's another one here. They are identical and they both release eggs, usually alternately, month by month. One egg will be released, say that it's this one here that I've arrowed, will release an egg, and the egg will travel down the fallopian tube. Now next month it might be this ovary which releases an egg, and it will travel down the fallopian tube. Now the whole purpose of this is for our species to reproduce, and we are looking to sexually reproduce. And as the egg goes down the fallopian tube, hopefully there will have been an injection of sperm which are going to travel up the cervix and then the uterus and into the fallopian tube. And they are going to meet in the fallopian tube, hopefully, say around here. Now if that happens, there is fertilization. And fertilization is when a sperm carrying 23 chromosomes and an egg carrying 23 chromosomes fuse in the fallopian tube to produce a zygote with 46 chromosomes. And those 46 chromosomes are the right number of chromosomes for a human being. And if fertilization happens, let me get rid of some of this extra stuff. If fertilization happens, the fertilized zygote will carry on down the fallopian tube and go to the edge of the uterine wall, and in that uterine wall it will implant and start to release hormones which will then coordinate the formation of a baby. Now in preparation for that, the body changes slightly, and that's what the menstrual cycle is about. Because when the egg, if we go back to this situation here with the ovary releasing the egg, as it travels down, it doesn't have any idea whether it's going to meet some sperm in the fallopian tube or not. And so it's moving, and the body prepares on the basis that it will actually meet some sperm and there will be fertilization. And therefore there will need to be the zygote implanting on the uterine wall. So what actually happens is that this uterine wall would have been actually thinner than is shown here. It might have looked a bit like that. And so this extra here that has built up has been laid down by the female body in order that when a zygote implants, it's got a really deep protected bed in which to implant. But it doesn't always happen that a woman gets pregnant every month. And of course it doesn't. And so sometimes when the egg is released from here, it will travel down the fallopian tube. There's no fertilization. It carries on as an unfertilized egg, and it comes out of the vagina. Now, at the same time as this, the whole system is reset. And so, as the egg leaves, so does all of the laid down uterine wall, extra uterine wall that I've done in red here. And so, as I start to wipe this away, it will have in fact been shed via the vagina. And then the whole process restarts again. We can rub all this out and we are left with our basic situation again. Okay, so the menstrual cycle is a preparation for fertilization, and if it doesn't happen, the woman menstruates, which means gets rid of the lining of the uterus and the unused egg, the unfertilized egg, and then the whole process starts again. Now this is controlled by hormones, and I'd like to talk about that in this session. But before we do that, let's actually look. My crude rubbish diagram is nothing compared to the way that it really works in 3D. So let's look at this process of conception as it should happen, including release of the egg and fertilization and implantation. So we can see here, here's the female reproductive, and we're going straight into the ovary, which is going to release the egg. And that is the release of, that's called ovulation. It travels into the fallopian tube. And this is on my crude diagram where the arrow is going and the egg is traveling down the fallopian tube. Hopefully there would have been sex. Hopefully there will be sperm, and here they are. So we are in the ball game here, and the sperm are attracted to the egg and they all start trying to burrow into the surface, trying to fuse with the egg. They've got enzymes in their heads which digest away the coat of the egg, and one sperm only will be able to get in. When he gets in, the coat changes its formation on the outside, so no other sperm can get in. The sperm nucleus is delivered to the nucleus of the egg, and this is the fusion of 23 chromosomes from the sperm and 23 chromosomes from the egg, and we now have a 46 chromosome zygote, which starts to divide by mitosis. You'll learn about that more later. Mitosis is the cloning, the completely genetically identical copying of every cell. So we've now got a ball of cells which makes its way down the fallopian tube into the uterus, and this is the uterine wall, which has been increased in thickness and size due to hormones, ready for this to happen. It releases enzymes which allow it to burrow into the uterine wall, and we now have a zygote which is turning into an embryo, which is now going to start growing and growing and growing. So that is the process of conception and implantation, which is the whole reason that we have the menstrual cycle, because if it doesn't work, we need to get rid of the extra hormone-induced uterine wall which has been laid down. So if we go back to our diagram of the female apparatus, hopefully you can see that journey now in your mind a little more clearly. But we need to know about how this process happens. And the way that this process happens is, I'm going to show you another video here. And this is, as I go through this, I'm going to talk you through the hormones involved in this process. But as I do this, I'd like you to be able to disregard some of the information here, because it is not actually relevant to what we need. Some of the information that you will be given in this video is actually not relevant. So,
to understand the various ways that medical science can assist reproduction, it is important to understand how the reproductive system functions in both sexes, because the cause of infertility often lies equally with both men and women. The main players in the female reproductive cycle are the pituitary gland, the ovaries, and the uterus. Their activities are...
Now, the pituitary gland is in the brain, the ovaries are part of the female reproductive system, and the uterus is obviously the area where the egg, the fertilized egg, is going to implant. So we need to know the layout of these three glands, which are going to be responsible for hormonal communication with each other.
Closely coordinated. Each month, one or other ovary releases a single egg, an event known as ovulation. It is brought about by a series of complex interactions between the pituitary gland, the ovaries, and the uterus.
So they're talking to each other.
The pituitary gland is itself under the control of this small area of the brain known as the hypothalamus. A new menstrual cycle begins when the nerve cells of this center secrete a hormone called gonadotrophin-releasing hormone,
Now, you don't need to know about that.
GnRH, into the network of blood vessels which surrounds the pituitary gland. Stimulated by pulses of gonadotrophin-releasing hormone, cells in the pituitary gland secrete another hormone, follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH.
Now, this is important. Follicle stimulating hormone is released by the pituitary gland. This is where we do need to come in and know our stuff. And this is going to be, because it's a hormone, it's going to be secreted by a gland, the pituitary gland, good, tick. It's going to be secreted into the blood, which is going to travel where it needs to get to target cells or target organs. And you can tell that that must happen because we're up in the brain here, we're a long way away from the area where the menstrual cycle is going to take place. So point one, follicle stimulating hormone is released by the pituitary gland.
FSH travels in the bloodstream, reaching the ovaries. There it stimulates the formation and growth of an ovarian follicle in one or other ovary. The follicle consists of an egg, a number of surrounding cells which secrete estrogen hormones, and fluid. FSH helps the egg to mature and prepares it for release.
Okay, FSH has been released by the pituitary and it acts upon the ovary, which is its target organ, and it's helping the egg to mature, preparing for its release. Okay, so this is a really important hormone which is setting the egg maturation, maturing egg, and release in motion.
As the follicle matures, the hypothalamus increases secretion of GnRH. This in turn stimulates the pituitary to secrete a second hormone which acts on the ovary. This is luteinizing hormone, or LH.
Okay, we don't have to worry about the gonadotrophin hormone, but we do have to know about luteinizing hormone. So we've got a situation where the pituitary gland has released FSH. That has had an effect on the ovary and the maturing egg. And now the pituitary is releasing a second hormone called luteinizing hormone.
Toward the middle of the cycle, there is a sudden peak in the blood level of LH. This acts as the trigger for ovulation.
Okay, so the luteinizing hormone has been released, and this is our first introduction to the timescales here. We just did around day 12 to 14. We suddenly get a spike in this luteinizing hormone released by the pituitary, and that suddenly goes BAM! And causes the matured egg, remember it was follicle stimulating hormone which matured the egg, to release the egg in ovulation.
Within minutes of its release, the egg is guided by suction through the fringed opening of the outer end of the fallopian tube, starting it on a journey which will take 5 or 6 days as it passes down the tube and finally reaches the cavity of the uterus. Meanwhile, after the follicle ruptures, it is converted into this yellowish body known as the corpus luteum. The cells of the corpus luteum secrete the hormone progesterone, which brings about
But we do need to know about progesterone.
important changes in the lining of the uterus, preparing it for possible pregnancy. In fact, the lining of the uterus, known as the endometrium, undergoes changes in response to hormone levels during the cycle. In the first half of the cycle, known as the follicular phase, the developing follicle secretes increasing amounts of estrogen hormone, which encourages regeneration of the endometrium. After ovulation, there are important changes in the endometrium, aimed at making it suitable to receive a fertilized egg. These changes are brought about by a secretion of progesterone from the corpus luteum.
Okay, so I talked earlier about the uterine wall preparing for the implantation of the egg, the fertilized egg. Estrogen starts, which is released from the ovary, starts to build up that wall. And then once ovulation happens, progesterone kicks in and is responsible for really thickening the uterine wall and keeping it nice and thick, just in case there's implantation.
The secretion of progesterone is maintained for several days, but if the egg is not fertilized in that time, the corpus luteum withers, and falling levels of progesterone and estrogen trigger the shedding of the uterine lining as the menstrual flow.
Okay, so if we've got no fertilization and no implantation, then the progesterone levels and the estrogen levels, which were keeping the uterine wall nice and thick and ready for implantation, suddenly plummet. And that's a bit like literally a trapdoor falling open, because once they plummet, the uterine wall is shed, and all of that diagram there is actually literally blood, and all of the blood vessels and tissues, which are extra tissues have been made that were readying it. We can see there on the video that it's day 28. And at day 28, it's like, okay, guys, we didn't have a successful month, I'm afraid. We're out of here, and let's see if we can begin again. And the uterine wall is shed, and that is the woman having a period.
The cycle then starts again. But if the egg is fertilized, no menstruation occurs, as the corpus luteum continues to function, secreting progesterone during the first 3 months of the pregnancy. Thereafter, numerous changes occur to support the developing embryo.